Welcome to the Old School Food Freedom Podcast, brought to you by your friends at Finding Balance. I'm your host, Chrissy Kirkman. On this show, we kick it as old school as it gets with how God created us to live, free from dieting, food rules, and body shame. Ready to replace the old soundtrack of cultural lies with biblical truth? Let's start with this. You don't have to be trapped by food struggles. You were created to be free. God adores you and wants you to experience the fullness of life without body hatred or bondage to dieting. The time is now to take a step toward the life you were created for. We're so glad you're here with us today. Let's get into today's episode. Around here, we don't celebrate Halloween, but we are highly aware of how candy season can feel like the catalyst to a holiday season food frenzy. And at some point in our lives, our entire team has felt bound by the shame of post-Halloween candy consumption, which becomes the perfect setup for a total holiday food freakout. Well, today, Kristen Williams and I will equip you with some new ways of thinking about holiday foods and dinners, tips to replace freakout mode with peace mode, and more. Oh, and we are celebrating our 50th episode of the Old School Food Freedom Podcast. I am beyond grateful that you are here with us, that you listen and share with friends, and that you share with us how Jesus has shown up for you through our show. To honor your listenership, we have a freebie, a special giveaway, and a big discount, all of which can set you up for success this holiday season and beyond. You won't want to miss this. Hey, Kristen, welcome to the Old School Food Freedom Podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Chrissy. I'm excited to be here.
Me too. And we have so much to celebrate. We are celebrating today our 50th episode of the Old School Food Freedom Podcast. I am so thankful that you're here. And we're talking about don't have a holiday food freak out, because I can't see y'all's hands, but hands up if you feel like you make it to the Halloween season. Now, while we're not really celebrating Halloween around here in the darkness, we know that candy just appears somewhere in September and it just keeps appearing. And there's all these snacks and treats and it's almost like actually our producer, Leah, she and I were talking about how like this is sort of, it feels like a catalyst of launching this food frenzy of the holidays, like Halloween. And so, you know, Halloween can be scary and you can start to freak out and you can start to like get in your head about what's coming with Thanksgiving, what's coming with Christmas. And it's like 2 months of endless different styles of foods and different parties and shenanigans that go on, right? So that's what we're going to be talking about today. We have some special surprises for all of you because you have been faithful listeners. And if this is your first time, we want to welcome you to the show. So we'll be talking about those throughout the show. But first, Kristen, I'm so glad you're here. Let me tell you about my friend, Kristen Williams. She's a registered dietitian and certified eating disorder specialist with a Christ-centered private practice in Dallas, Texas. Kristen helps individuals to make peace with food using a non-diet approach and is passionate about encouraging women to break free from body image bondage in order to experience fulfillment in their physical and mental health. Yes, wonderfully made nutrition counseling. Is that correct?
That's correct. You got it.
Love it, love it. Okay, well, we got to kick off the 50th episode of our show with our favorite question. What old school item or experience do you miss from back in the day?
Yeah, that's a great question. First of all, I just want to say congratulations on the 50th episode too, because that's really exciting and there's such a need for it. And so my hope is that there will be 50 more plus episodes to come from Food Freedom Podcast. And I love this question. And I have to say, the thing that I miss most is honestly like a landline phone and dial-up internet. And I know that sounds so bizarre. Like, why would you want to go back to that time of like, nobody used the phone, I'm dialing up for the internet. But I just miss not being so connected all of the time to emails and text messages and all the things. And so I kind of miss a landline and dial-up.
I think that's fabulous that you said that. I would say that's probably becoming a more frequent answer to this question, because like back in the day, we used to feel like, oh, I just wish I had a phone anywhere I could go and I could look at things and search things. That was Inspector Gadget stuff, to be honest. Like, go gadget flip phone, like, and you're dialing stuff up. But like, that is freedom to be able to leave your house, leave the phone, leave the access that people have to you when they want to access you. You're leaving your house and you're free and you can just experience life without checking your phone every 2 seconds.
Totally. We were on vacation just last week and I had this compulsion to like check my emails and things like that. And I was like, man, obviously I could set better boundaries, but also if I had dial up, it wouldn't be as easy to access these things.
Yeah, so true. I love that. Okay, let's just get into it. I mean, holiday food freak out. So the struggle, just let's lay it out. The struggle is that Halloween really does seem like a catalyst to the holiday food season frenzy, right?
100%.
And so many people just feel bound by shame just in general or post-Halloween candy consumption. Even if you're not celebrating Halloween, sometimes there's certain types of candies that come out during that season, maybe on one side of the fence or another with candy corn. I like candy corn and I like to pair it with peanuts, salty peanuts. So it's like a payday bar. Works for me. But then you feel shame and guilt, like the candy was bad or you haven't had it for a year and then you overindulge and then all this stuff piles up. Like, what would you say about that? Like, help us know how we can be free of that kind of shame. Like, what do we need to know?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a great topic. And so I'm excited to just have the opportunity to talk about it. But I think that a lot of people, whether you celebrate Halloween or not, is really kind of beside the point because come late October, most of us have Halloween type foods or candies more readily available. So school functions for your kids, maybe like a bowl set out in the office, whatever it may be. And I think for a lot of people that haven't experienced freedom with food, there's a lot of anxious kind of energy, if you will, about this feels like the start of it all. Just like you mentioned, kind of the catalyst, because we know that Thanksgiving is right around the corner. And then after that, we know that Christmas is right around the corner. And so there's a lot of, I think, fear and anxiety. And I think part of that is because there are so many foods that we think of being specific to a certain holiday and not all year round. And we think of overconsumption or feeling out of control. But I really think that the issue becomes we've made food such a moral situation that come late October, it feels like this food is bad, therefore I'm bad. And that contributes to the shame that you've mentioned multiple times already, which unfortunately keeps us in this cycle of bondage and disordered eating until New Year's, where then, diet culture is at an all-time high. Let's quote unquote get on track or, be quote unquote better. And so that's what I see in my experience with individuals.
So like you're saying, even once we get to that, like New Year's Eve, and it's just this constant, resolutions and get on track, like you're saying, do you feel like knowing that New Year's Eve is coming and, it's the whole, I'll start on Monday and just have the weekend, or, you know what, it's not a big deal. I'm just going to eat these foods. They only come once a year. And then New Year's rolls around and things will just get better then, or I'll make resolutions. So it reminds me of the Last Supper kind of mentality. Does that make sense? Like, what would you say about that?
Yeah, it makes complete sense. I honestly think making such a big deal about New Year's and New Year's resolutions actually makes things worse, and it reinforces that diet mentality, which then I think reinforces kind of that Last Supper mentality of, well, it's the holidays, I'm going to just eat as much as I want for Thanksgiving and Christmas and just really not care, that Last Supper mentality, because, starting January 1st, I'm never going to eat these foods again. And, you mentioned we do have freedom. Absolutely. But I think that true food freedom is the freedom to say yes to certain foods and the freedom to say no to certain foods. And if I can expand on that a little bit more later,
Please.
but if we think that, something is inherently bad and this is the last time that we're going to eat it because new year, new me, then of course that's going to lead someone to feeling out of control with eating, which is going to contribute to shame, which 9 times out of 10 is either going to keep someone in that place of feeling out of control or trigger inappropriate restrictive patterns or other compensatory behaviors.
When I heard you say we can say yes to foods and we can say no to foods. And when I hear that, I'm thinking of a person thinking, well, why would I ever want to say no to a food? Like, are there foods that are off limits that I don't like? Immediately, there's this kind of like worked up, well, there's something I'm missing out on. I don't know what foods are off limits. Maybe it's not even that the foods are off limits. It's the pausing and asking, I can have this food and how does it make my body feel? Maybe I don't want to have indigestion at this party. Maybe I don't want to be up all night with a stomach ache because I know that this type of food causes that issue for me. Or I never get Grandma Mabel's, whatever casserole except one time a year and it gives me heartburn, but it's okay because I'm going to have some. I'm going to slowly enjoy it. I'm going to taste those flavors. I'm going to know that I'm with my family. That we'll be getting into family stuff too, because that's a whole next level of unpacking to do. And just thinking about like, what are reasons I would say no to foods? Don't have an underlying current of shame.
Sure. I think there's a lot of confusion and misconceptions when it comes to what intuitive eating is and what it isn't. And I share with my clients a lot. And I know you and I have had this discussion of it really is the freedom to say yes and the freedom to say no, meaning I can say yes to, let's say, a salad, not because I have to, not because it's morally superior, not because I'm on a diet, but because maybe that's what I genuinely want in the moment. And that's what's going to help me feel well. And I can say no to a certain type of dessert, not because it's bad, not because I can't have it, but because I genuinely don't want it in the moment. And I think that a lot of people get confused and they think, well, if I say yes to the salad, I must be dieting and not free. And if I say no to the dessert, I must be dieting and not free. But it really boils down to their underlying heart posture and making that food choice. And then I think kind of in regards to something you mentioned earlier too, there's kind of this pendulum swing of restrictive dieting and then feeling out of control with eating. And as you probably know, most chronic dieters spend their life swinging from extreme to extreme. We know there's shame all in that. And so the idea of, people think, well, if you tell me I can have anything I want whenever I want, I'm just going to eat and eat, eat. And that's not true intuitive eating. That's someone who's been in that diet pendulum swing. And so the goal really is to get the pendulum to settle so that we can begin to take some of the shininess, if you will, out of some of those forbidden foods so that food really does become amoral, and then we can kind of take it or leave it. And kind of one last thing, I know I've said a lot already, but I think that diet mentality and shame leads us to overconsume during the holiday times, which is interesting because our goals are backfiring. It's the people that feel out of control during the holidays that want to diet in January, whereas oftentimes the people that have experienced true food freedom are able to eat what they genuinely enjoy without necessarily feeling out of control the whole holiday season, if that makes sense.
It does. And I'll tell you, I spent years on that pendulum swinging back and forth and having holiday events and family events where it was just like I was loading my plate, very Last Supper mentality, not meaning to eat as much as I could, but somewhere in my mind, I'm thinking, I know I'm not going to have these for a long time. And I never get these types of foods, a lot of casseroles and hearty, rich things. And then I would want to go back for seconds, even though I was full. It was very, very bingey. And like, I was always miserable, sometimes for a couple of days. And when I began to, learn to eat intuitively and just really take that moral compass, I guess, away from foods are bad or foods are good or I'm bad and good. And just, it was like the first experience I had of going through, the line to select the casseroles and foods that I loved. It was a very different experience. It was more, I can have any of this stuff, which I could have before, but it's like now this thing that I used to just load up on, like literally 1/2 a scoop or something, is really all I genuinely wanted. I just needed the flavor of it or the taste or the experience of it. And I would tell you, my plates were a lot less full. Not that going back for seconds would have been right or wrong, but it was a very different experience. And I was less focused on what I used to really be consumed by what they were thinking or the comments they would say potentially about what my plate looked like, and food policing and making comments about my body or something. It was just in my head of just potential chaos, making up stories. And so friends, I just want you to hear my heart and my experience of how different it can be when you release your expectations. I don't know.
Yeah. And when you're just able to detach, I tell clients all the time, foods aren't necessarily nutritionally equal, but we want them to be emotionally equal.
Yeah.
And that means that, you can have the casserole and not feel a sense of shame, but you can also have, the sweet potatoes and not feel a sense of, maybe that's a bad example, but not feel a sense of pride or self-righteousness. And, something that you mentioned brought up another thought, Chrissy, about specific foods that we think of when we think of our family gatherings and when we think of specific times of the year like Thanksgiving. I think of my grandma's dressing that now my mom makes. And I think that, again, the goal is to kind of remove some of the shininess from those food items so that we can see them for what they are. And it's really just food that can taste really good and bring back memories, but has no moral value. And so sometimes I'll encourage clients, if you are able to, and you have access to that family member that makes the recipe, or you have the recipe yourself, experiment with allowing yourself to have some of those things during non-holiday meals, when you have a little bit more time to prepare or to get together with family members and it's for no particular reason or a birthday. And then also taking into consideration, which we may discuss more later about this, but, what are foods that are there at the holiday meal that I could have any day of the week? Like canned corn, I could literally have that any day of the week during the year. And so kind of taking some of that into consideration as well when making your plate at the holiday gathering, with the ultimate goal being there's no moral value on this food, on this plate. There's no moral value in food. I am not a good or bad person based off of my food choices.
100%. Hey there. I'm so grateful that you are here and listening to the Old School Food Freedom Podcast. As always, you can find helpful links from today's episode in the show notes. I want to personally thank those of you who make this podcast possible. For over 20 years, Finding Balance has been helping people walk in freedom by finding Jesus in their struggles with food and body image. If you'd like to join others in supporting this ongoing work, you can do so in one of 3 ways. 1, leave a comment and review for the podcast on your preferred podcast app. 2, share the podcast with your network and friends on social media or via text and email. 3, this podcast is made possible because of generous donors. If you'd like to make a tax-deductible donation or become a monthly supporter, you can do so at findingbalance.com/donate. Our key scripture, it is for freedom that Christ has set us free. Stand firm then and do not submit again to a yoke of slavery. Galatians 5:1. And you know what else just came to mind as you were talking is I was thinking the other thing that really set me up, not only for success mentally, but physically, is that during recovery, I was taught how important it is to not skip meals, obviously in general, but I have done years of skipping meals and it did not help me. And I was very, well, we can go into that later, but typically if I were going to any kind of family event or some kind of, holiday food event, I was going to eat either nothing to save up for that event or very little. Never would I eat breakfast. Like I would just go on pretty much on an empty stomach, which then led to eating so much more food than I needed, that my body really wanted, that really even felt good. And so eating prior to those meals, even if it's something small, and I noticed that I kind of gravitated toward more nourishing types of foods and kind of checking in with the hunger scale and just not waiting so long to eat, because then that led to me being uncomfortably full and then setting myself up for falling back into more disordered behavior. So what are your thoughts on that?
I'm so glad that you brought that up, because that's a really good point. And you probably already know this, Chrissy. It's so common.
Yeah.
There's always the awkward eating times, I feel like, during the holidays of, we're going to eat at 3. And it's like, okay, is that lunch or is that dinner? What are we calling that? And so many people will have this restrictive mindset leading up to the meal. And then why that can be so difficult is because it really sets them up to feel out of control with eating once they get to, their holiday gathering. And I share with clients all the time, if you sit down for a meal and you're starving, you've waited too long to eat. And you're going to eat at a faster pace. You're probably going to put more on your plate than you otherwise would. You're probably going to have more difficulty feeling your fullness and honoring that. And so it's interesting, because a lot of people, the reason they do it is because they're scared that if they eat during the day leading up to their holiday gathering, that they'll overconsume. But it's kind of backfiring, because they tend to restrict leading up to their holiday gathering, and then they overconsume, not because they lack willpower, but because they're so hungry by the time they sit down to their meal. And so I've also had clients share, well, I'm not really hungry though. We're getting together at noon and I wasn't really hungry before, so I just won't eat. And we've been talking a lot more in sessions about sometimes you have to take into consideration future you and you have to eat for future you, even if present you is not hungry. So if I know that I'm not hungry right now, but I'm about to get in the car for a 20-minute drive to the restaurant, a 30-minute wait, and then I have to wait for my meal. My goodness, that's, an hour and a half before the meal comes. I'm probably going to be starving at that point. So I would serve the future me well by having a snack before I head out to dinner. And so sometimes taking that into consideration before the holiday meal can be helpful as well.
Yeah. And it falls into mindfulness, being aware and mindful and present versus obsession. It's that, again, all or nothing thinking, finding the balance between it and being mindful and present and stopping to feel our feelings. I still find myself not stopping to check in and feel what I'm feeling and really think through forward planning of future me. Because you made a great point of the 20-minute drive and the 30-minute wait. And it's oh my gosh, how fast that adds up. You've got an hour there and then the food isn't coming fast. You got to order, you got to get your drinks. And the next thing you know, you're yeah, I want an appetizer because I need food. Then it goes into the frenzy speed.
Yeah. And I think that, you mentioning the difference between mindfulness and obsession, I think that's another misconception about intuitive eating. Some people will say, well, I don't like the whole idea of intuitive eating. It seems like you just eat whatever you want, whenever you want. You're not really thinking about anything. And as you know, that's not true, that gentle nutrition is part of intuitive eating, but there is a difference in being mindful with what you're choosing to put on your plate and being obsessive. And I think that obsessiveness leads to keeping you in bondage and enslaved. If you're having to think, mindfulness, you want to put some thought into your eating, but if you're at your holiday event or it's an hour after, a day after, and you're having, 90% of your thoughts are still just reeling about food, that's obsession. If you're having to pack certain things for your holiday event, foods that feel safe, that might be obsession. Or if you're bringing measuring cups, hopefully you're not, but to your event, then that's obsession. And so really being able to seek discernment with what is mindfulness that I want to lean into and what is obsession that I really want to lean away from.
Yeah. And sweet friend, if you hear this and you're oh, I take measuring cups. That's me. And you're starting to feel shame about that because Kristen mentioned it. Please don't feel shame. Please know that that is not our intention. Our intention is to just bring awareness and ask questions, help you ask questions of like, is this what I want for my life? Do I feel like I'm doing the right thing? Or is maybe this more bondage, a yoke of slavery we're not even aware of sometimes?
I'm glad that you said that as well, Chrissy, because the reason I even mentioned it is obviously not to cause shame on anybody, but as a reminder that if that is you listening, you're not alone. Because the reason I even mentioned it is, unfortunately, it is common. That rigidity and the measuring is common in individuals struggling with disordered eating. So if you're hearing this, hopefully knowing that you are absolutely not alone, but there is freedom that you could be walking in, and that is not it. And so that's, where it's so helpful to have a community of support to help walk you away from that and into freedom.
Absolutely. And that actually is a great place for me to let you all know about this exciting celebration that we're doing for our 50th episode. This podcast launched in October of 2022. So since we're on our 50th episode, we want to give you 50% off of our Lasting Freedom participant bundle, which includes our holiday module. And so you're basically getting 3 modules for free. Each module, there are 7 total of the Lasting Freedom course, and each module has 6 weeks worth of content. So in that holiday module, you'll be able to learn some more tools and be set up for some additional success and preparation for going into these parties and navigating family triggers and things like that, which I'd like to get into. So look for this link in our show notes. You can go to FINDINGbalance.com and go to our courses page and use code 50OSFF podcast for 50% off. This offer expires December 4th, 2024, and we'll be talking about 2 more actual giveaways coming up. So, Kristen, I was also thinking about the family triggers, right? So we have, sometimes it's not even family, it's friends. We also have family that we're seeing, maybe we haven't seen in a while. There are a lot of triggers that come up of like, how do I look now? Maybe I've lost weight. Maybe I've gained weight. What will they say? What will they do? Will they police my food intake? And all kinds of comments. So how can we prepare for comments that we can't control?
Yeah. Oh, that's so tough. That is so tough. And I wish I had like this beautiful answer for you. But I will say that I think it's so important, if your listeners hear nothing else about, the question that you just asked, to know that when comments are made, that doesn't mean it has anything to do with you directly.
Say it again for the people in the back, please. Okay, friends, really tune in. Like sometimes you got to have that screeching halt, listen in moment. Can you please say that again? Because it is important that we grasp this.
Yes, when comments are made, that does not mean that it has anything to do with you. Even if the comment is made directly towards you, it usually is just a reflection of that person. And it could be their lack of understanding or related to their own food issues. And so I was talking to a client who just recently got back from family vacation, and lots of food comments were made about not her directly, but other people's bodies and eating. And we really talked about, the old childhood saying, which sounds so silly, but is so true, about I'm rubber, you're glue. Whatever you say bounces off of me and back to you. And to remind yourself, okay, when someone is commenting on what I've put on my plate, I get it all the time at my own family gatherings. I thought you were a dietitian, Kristen. What are you doing eating the dessert? And it's like, well, because I'm actually a human as well. And who does not like dessert? But remembering that that's no longer a sense of shame for me that there's dessert on my plate, because I know that comment has really nothing to do with me. It's indicative of that person's lack of understanding of food freedom.
And what they've been taught, what they've been raised in, what they've seen modeled for them in their own family, what they've consumed with social media, TV, movies, magazines, their work people, all the things. Like it helps me to remember, man, that used to be me. Or maybe it didn't used to be me, but I didn't know what I didn't know. And then God helped me see how I had been deceived, how we have all been deceived. He helped me see what the mastermind behind diet culture to lead us astray and burden us in a yoke of slavery. Like he turned on the light and I could see it. Then I also have to realize, okay, that maybe this isn't the time, not necessarily for a battle, but maybe this isn't the time to completely have a sit down education, diet culture 101, food freedom 101 kind of thing. Sometimes it's best just to move on. Other times, maybe it's good to speak up in a loving, gentle way and advocate for yourself. There are a lot of options. The one option I know will work for you is say, even if it's in your heart and silent, Jesus, help me. Jesus, help me know how to respond, or if to respond at all. Jesus, help me to not let those words sink in and take some kind of root. Help me to see this person and love them as you love them, because they're worthy of love. They're just blinded.
Yeah, that's so good. And a few different thoughts come to mind hearing you say that. One is a therapist shared with me that people's intent do not always equal the impact. And so most of the time, people are not meaning to say harmful things, that are not feeling supportive. We can assume the best of most people most of the time, but the impact that it has, people aren't always aware of the impact. And kind of like what you were mentioning in regards to diet culture, I know you and I have talked about this previously, that it's like walking around with blinders on, those, horse-drawn carriages, and how the horses have blinders on so that they can't be distracted by the things around them and they can only see what's ahead. And when we are just covered in diet culture, surrounded by it, we don't know what we don't know. And we might be participating in conversation, degrading our bodies, or, talking about calories and things like that. And then it's like the blinders come off and we become so much more aware of the people around us. And we think, oh my goodness, has everyone always been talking about food this much? Have my coworkers been talking about weight loss this much? And there's that initial frustration and sadness. But if we can pause and show some compassion of like, these people are still walking around with blinders on.
Yeah. And it's sad. The compassion really comes in. It's sad. And so to wrap all that together to help us to not have a holiday food freak out, but like to think, okay, that's sad that they're in. I want freedom for them. I want them to be free. And maybe that's not what God's asking me to just solve that problem. I'm sure it's not. What he's asking you to do is to solve that problem right then and there. But to think, okay, what I can do is release. I can listen to God's truth and really stand firm on it. And I can look at this day that's never going to come again. I'm going to look at this family with the chaos that comes with our families, and the shenanigans. And I'm going to look at the special peppermint bark or Cajun corn casserole that we talk about in our family. And I'm going to enjoy it for what it is. I'm going to embrace this moment, take it in, and sit with my feelings, the emotions that are hard and strong. Sometimes I may need to excuse myself, take a walk around, get some fresh air, depending on where you live. It may be too cold. You may be sweating. I don't know. But it's okay if you need to leave the room for a minute or to come back. But just to be present, to be mindful, and really be aware of this moment matters. My family matters. Family matters. That's old school. I'm sorry. And thank God. Be grateful. Have some gratitude in a season called Thanksgiving and Christmas, focusing on why we even celebrate Christmas. Oh, those are mind shifts that I know are also in the Lasting Freedom holiday module. We talk through some of those mindset shifts and things, kind of tools to help you.
Well, and even as you're talking about that, I think of spiritual warfare. And I'm thinking, you're saying like, remember why you're here. Remember why you're gathering. Remember the reason for the holiday. It's like, of course, the enemy wants us to be distracted. Of course, he wants us thinking about the caloric content of our meal or the way that our pants are now fitting after we've eaten the meal. Like, he wants us to be distracted from the things that matter and to not be able to fully step into our purpose. And I think sometimes if we can redirect the anger from ourselves to the enemy and realize there is a real battle, there's a real spiritual battle taking place here. And what would it look like to say to my eating disorder or the enemy of, you know what? You're not welcome at this family event. And when little bits of you pop up and remind me that you've snuck in, I'm going to remind you mentally, you're not welcome at this event. You're not welcome in this memory.
Love it. That's the perfect way to wrap this up. Do you have any scripture that you want to leave us with that can help us?
Yeah, I love that. I do. I've got my Bible here, and I thought it was only fitting with your podcast. I was going through a couple of different options, and I came to John 8:36, where it talks about, so if the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed. But I wanted to give a little bit of context and read for you, your listeners, the commentary for my Bible, where it talks about sin has a way of enslaving us, controlling us, dominating us, and dictating our actions. Jesus can free you from this slavery that keeps you from becoming the person God created you to be. If bondage is restraining, mastering, or enslaving you, Jesus can break its power over your life. When I think about the freedom that we have in Christ in the context of food and body image freedom, I think, one, in our weakness, he is made strong. So for those of you listening who feel a sense of hopelessness, that is where the Holy Spirit can really show up and work. But two, when we are walking in freedom with Christ, then we are fully available to be who he has called us to be. And so the visualization of, am I walking in the fullness and freedom of Christ so that I can live out my calling and be who he's created me to be? Or am I finding myself going back to slavery? Or how Heather Creekmore talks about going back to Egypt. Because I want to press on to the freedom that's been given and not go back to bondage.
Gosh, that's so good. And it's perfect because I can ask you now to describe the last time you experienced true freedom. Like, what did it look like for you out of bondage, true freedom?
Yeah, I love that question. And I thought of two specific things. One, back to, I was trying to think, when did I experience absolute freedom where there wasn't any hint of disordered thinking or shame? And I thought back to my honeymoon with my own personal struggles with food and body image. I never would have imagined that it would be possible to stand in front of my husband naked and unashamed. And I just think of that time as complete unadulterated freedom. But then I also think since then of like motherhood and, and just time passing, aging, different stages of life. I think freedom has also been in a swimsuit, sitting down on the beach with my daughter, building a sandcastle, maybe not feeling wonderful about my body, but completely at the same time accepting it. And it's not preventing me in any way from being down there in the sand, building a sandcastle, stopping for a picture with her. I think sometimes we think of freedom and it has to be this picture perfect moment of I have to love everything I'm working with. And I'm like, you know what? I can specifically think of times and pictures where I was on the beach in a swimsuit and I can say, I wasn't crazy about what I was working with, but that was still freedom because it wasn't holding me back from being present in the moment and having those fulfilling experiences with my daughter at the beach.
Perfect. I love that so much. And I relate to you. And friends, God can use you exactly the way you are right now. Like, he's not asking you to weigh in at the pearly gates. He's not asking you to weigh in right now. Like, he's not asking you to get it together before he can use you. He wants a willing heart, no size qualifications, recommendations, none of that. As you are, just as I am. Love that. Well, Kristen, thank you so much for being on our show. Hey, friends, there's another exciting giveaway. So Kristen has the In His Image conference. You host this conference in Dallas, correct?
Yes.
You host it, like it's part of Wonderfully Made Nutrition Counseling.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. Okay, so there is free virtual access to the In His Image conference. There's a link in our show notes. So please go there and access this conference and learn more. See what God has to show you through this conference. Also, Kristen has a book called Unworthy Weight, Reclaiming Your Worth from a Number on a Scale and Finding True Identity in Christ. She's giving away a couple of books. So look for the link in our show notes. And there's not a book for everyone, but if you are one of the first to click this link, you can get a book and we'll send it to you. And you can find other ways to connect with Kristen Williams in our show notes. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Christy. It's been fun.
Thank you for listening to the Old School Food Freedom Podcast. For over 20 years, Finding Balance has been helping people walk in freedom by discovering where Jesus fits into their struggles with food and body image. If you want more biblical truth and encouragement, head on over to FINDINGbalance.com and subscribe to our free daily vitamin devotional. While you're there, explore our Christ-centered Lasting Freedom online course and small group tools. You can help keep this ministry going by donating today at FINDINGbalance.com. See you next time. The content in this podcast is for informational purposes only and is not intended to diagnose, treat, or prescribe a particular course of action. If you have or suspect you may have an eating disorder, please consult your healthcare provider. If you desire to receive faith-based care, visit ChristianTreatmentFinder.com to browse professionals with a Kingdom campaign against eating disorders.